So we are very much a part of the world of art, and art is a part of our spirituality. Art at its best is a type of beauty that Pope Francis tells us that speaks the truth, it speaks to goodness and truth. So what we're looking for in Christian and spiritual art is a type of beauty that leads us into the transcendent, a type of beauty that speaks goodness and truth, and helps to articulate the depths of of the mystery of the human experience and the depths of the mystery of the human experience as it encounters God. So when art and the liturgy in particular join forces, so when our Christian tradition and art join forces, they're capable of expressing transcendence. Transcendence is that out of the ordinary, we might even say ecstasy, and we'll show an example of that on a slide tonight. Ex meaning apart from or away from. Stasis means, everything's, it's static. Stasis, everything's the same. So ecstasis means out of the ordinary, beyond the ordinary, into the transcendent. Now the transcendent and the ordinary are linked. They're not separate from each other. We're not talking dualism, we're not talking either or. We're talking about how we have the fullness of the experience, that from the depths of the reality of our humanity, we can encounter the transcendent. But the transcendent is going to be about our humanity and yet beyond our humanity also. By transcendence, we mean what God is capable of doing. And what we mean by that and transcendence is that God can be in your heart and in my heart at the same time. Whereas you and I can't do that. I can hardly even be in my own heart. So God is capable of being in your heart and in my heart and in everyone that's lived heart and in everyone that will be born's heart. So this is what we mean by transcendence, being able, not bound by time or space or particular personalities. Intimacy and yet beyondness. Totally accessible, yet totally other. So this is a paradox, that God can love us uniquely for who each of us is, and yet who each of us is can be entirely different. So how does that work? Well, that's only God can do that. That's what we mean by transcendence. Humans aren't capable of that type of love. So we have some great encyclicals that popes have written. You might want to, you won't be able to write this down because you can't see too well, but Pope Paul VI, at the closing of the Second Vatican Council, wrote a letter to the artists of the world that's very beautiful, and he chose to use the closing of the council as a time to focus on art. We'll read a little bit from John Paul II's letter to artists. It's very famous and very rich. And of course, most recently, in The Joy of the Gospel, Pope Francis wrote some about the importance of beauty and of art. So beauty, goodness, and truth are what we're looking for in Christian art that helps us get in touch with God, helps us get in touch with the transcendent, helps us to celebrate the transcendent and its mystery, helps us to be challenged by it. Some art is quite challenging. Let me say something about beauty. Beauty does not necessarily mean pretty. So there's pretty, and that's nice. That's not necessarily beauty. Beauty can be, if it speaks truth and goodness, can border on the ugly even. And sometimes through the ugly we can find the truth. There's certain types of art. If you think of, we were given an example on the conference we were just at in San Antonio. If you have the example of Guernica, the famous painting of the Spanish Civil War and its catastrophes and the horror of that. If you can recall it, it's in black and white, and it's rather large, and it's violent. It's people dying. It's animals being caught in the battle, and so it's really not what I'd call beautiful in the sense that it's pretty. But it's profound. It speaks something to the human condition and the truth of the human experience that raises us to a type of insight and a type of encounter that Picasso was capable of doing through this form, particularly Cubism. So we're not talking pretty, and especially in church we grapple with this. The beauty that we're looking for in art in church is has to also speak to something that is common to us all, hopefully, but not in a simplistic or sentimental way. Philosophy has been written about what beauty is, and beauty is sometimes arguable, of course, about what is beautiful and what isn't. But let's try to get beyond just the mere pretty or the mere sentimental or kitschy. And this is a problem sometimes in churches that they're adorned with things that are cute or maybe a little kitschy or a little too much like you'd find in your home. Not that your homes don't have massive art collections, but you know what I'm saying? So what's the difference between home art or folk art or craft and art? What's the difference between literature, a form of art, and a pulp fiction? So there's degrees of creativity, and some excels in reaching the transcendent, and that we would label a literature, or we would label it a masterpiece. There's something about the working of the material, or there's something about the sentiment. A piece can be sentimental, but not be about sentimentality, not be about isn't that cute? We can enjoy "isn't that cute," but I don't want to. We're not going to light a candle in front of Grumpy Cat here in the church, and that's so adorable. We can like things on different levels, but when we're talking about church art, we're talking about something that is more communally appreciated, something more transcendent. And interestingly enough, we have an art form available to us in our day, which involves abstraction. And some people find abstraction not to their taste, but when we have non-representational art, in other words, it's not just a drawing of a thing or a person, but it's the use of color. To a certain degree, our windows are abstractions, to a certain degree. I mean, smoke from a volcano doesn't really look like that, right? But that smoke and fire from the volcano, in the way it's expressed, is a type of expressionism and abstraction that captures something that's not literal, but moves us beyond the literal. It's like poetry does that. Poetry is the only language that seems to be able to speak beyond the literal and move us to some type of encounter with mystery. So even in our own day, we have art that is abstract, and it's often used in churches because it can help us to enter into something at everyone's own level. Everyone can interpret something the way or encounter something the way that they wish. And by abstraction, we don't necessarily mean something cold. It can be quite vibrant. This window up here is an abstraction, really. What is it? It's just shapes and forms and stuff. Do we hate it? No, it's quite beautiful. And it speaks to me of something about creation. It's connected to these windows somehow. It's about it. There's an energy to it. And when the light comes through it, when we took the wall away, so you could actually see the window, do you all remember when there was a wall there? And so no one even noticed the window. And so one of the reasons we took the wall away was so that we could encounter that piece of art that some wonderful person put all that time and effort into and everything. And when the light comes through it in the morning, then you have an experience of light. That's what stained glass was all about. Encountering light that had been somehow used by humanity to encounter God. So it was light, and yet it was beyond light. In the American experience, we called it transcendentalism. They used just natural light to speak of something beyond light. If you look at those white churches in New England, and they took away the color of the panes of glass so that just the natural light could come through. And that's its own transcendence, because the way they let the natural light come through illuminated the assembly in a certain way and made a vibrancy in the people of God. So this artist friend of mine, I can't remember her name right now. She's rather famous, and I think she's passed away, but she tells this story about how when she was growing up in the church that she went to in New England, and it was more of a Gothic revival thing with lots of stained glass and all that. She says when she was a child, she couldn't tell you a thing now at this point in her life about what any priest ever talked about. But she completely remembers the light coming through the stained glass windows and what they were talking about. So, and that's what stained glass was used for, also, to tell a story. People were illiterate, right, in the medieval era and that type of thing. And I can't answer the phone right now. And at least the flashlight still works. And so we could encounter the story through visuals, and there wasn't a printing press or anything, so there weren't lots of pieces of paper or whatever that people could. So the windows were this public form of telling the story and encountering the story in a way that moved through color and light. And so we have such beautiful examples of that in our own tradition. So before we totally dismiss abstraction, look at the examples we have of it in our own. Even the icons we have are abstract to a certain degree. These aren't literal representations of people, right? So what's that about? So even back in the 4th and 5th century when people started painting icons in the Eastern Church, they were never literal representations of people. They were supposed to help the encounter with the divine. And that's the nice thing about icons, just a little bit about that, is that they help us to encounter the divine. At least that's their intention, through their abstraction, through their focusing on a certain dimension or characteristic of the saint that they're portraying, so that the saint is looking at us. That's the main thing about an icon, is that we're not looking at it. The icon is looking at us. This is a distinctive thing about religious art, is it can also be God looking at us in a certain way. And that's what icons do. So it's supposed to help facilitate a relationship. This is good Christian art too, facilitating community and relationship and building a self-understanding of who a people are. I told the morning people once about a piece of art that was an image of the Blessed Mother, the Virgin Mary. And they wanted to emphasize that they understood their community as being a community, and that they were in communion with the Blessed Mother, and that she was a sister in faith. And so the statue of the Blessed Mother was placed like about where Gil is. It was in the midst of the assembly. And so that creates, what does that create? That creates a whole different understanding of who we are, who the Blessed Mother is, what kind of devotion we can have to her and with her, who she is directed towards, like we are God. So where we place art, like where we place the icons in our church here, they're more at the level that when we stand during the Eucharistic prayer, they are praying the Eucharistic prayer with us. So just a couple inches higher, and we wouldn't be able to have them look at us or be with us when we pray. So they're put at a certain level so that if you notice when you stand, you can only sort of see them because they're praying with us. They're at the same eye level height as we are when we're standing. That's an entirely different thing than this, we're putting a picture up to look at because it's pretty, or it'll make us feel holy things. I hope you all know that the icon we have of St. Bridget there is an original icon by a famous icon painter, Bill McNichols. And some of the other icons here are reproductions of his, but this was an original icon that we thank the Knights of Columbus for funding. We had a little trouble explaining what an icon was to them because we're not all familiar with that in the Western tradition. And so Rock, you all remember Rock, he said to them, finally after I guess an hour's discussion, he said, "It's a painting." And they went, "Oh, okay." But hopefully we're getting a little better understanding of icons. I was on Mount Athos in Greece, which is a peninsula of Greece filled with maybe 20 monasteries, Greek monasteries. They have art that goes back to the 4th and 5th century, icons. They have quite a spirituality in the Eastern Church about, these are practically people. They have stories of icons that floated across the Black Sea or something from Russia and ended up in Greece, and you know, they're miraculous in and of themselves, sort of like some of our relics are in the Western tradition. Okay, I hope that phone didn't interrupt too much. Let me read this a little bit from the John Paul II's letter to artists. Before I do that, though, I gotta find it and find my glasses. Let's look at what we have up here. We have Saint Sebastian. You always know it's Saint Sebastian. He's always the guy that's in his loincloth with arrows in him. So Saint Sebastian is just a figure we find constantly in Christian Catholic art. We put him up here today not because he's our favorite one, although he's quite a nicely painted one, but today is his feast day. This is the feast of Saint Sebastian, so we're just honoring him to put that up. Dostoevsky said, and he's quoted here by John Paul II, Dostoevsky said, "Beauty will save the world." And John Paul II quotes him here. The church needs art. In order to communicate the message entrusted to her by Christ, the church needs art. Art must make perceptible and as far as possible attractive the world of the spirit, of the invisible, of God. So that's the vocation of artists, is to make, like the vocation of Jesus was to make God visible in human form, the vocation of artists is to make God visible through the use of the materials that are at hand that we can associate with the artistic creations. Art has a unique capacity to take one or other facet of the message and translate it into colors, shapes, and sounds which nourish the intuition of those who look or listen. It does so without emptying the message itself of its transcendent value and its aura of mystery. The church has a need especially of those who can do this on the literary and the figurative level. So there's, again, he acknowledges there's two approaches to art. You know, the literal, here's a painting of a rose, or the figurative or abstract. You know, how could you capture the essence of a rose in another way in which you know it's a rose, but it's more than a rose, and yet that more than a rose leads us into the true rose, a rose by any other name. And the church needs musicians. Music, remember, is an art. And so how does music help us to encounter the gospel, the kingdom of God, the Christian, the message? How does it move our hearts to certain Christian sentiment? And art, and what we can say about music, what we say about the visual arts, we can also say about music in terms of it can't be too schmaltzy or just, you know, happy tunes from our childhood, or how is it transformative? How is it leading us into the transcendent? And some music may not be that nice to our ears, but it has a certain message that it's getting across. Some music can be quite sweet and sentimental. On certain occasions that's appropriate, but in other occasions it may not be. So we have to make those decisions, and as a matter of fact, your liturgy committee helps make those decisions every week when we meet and discuss what will be appropriate text and music for this Mass. So there's Saint Sebastian, God bless him. A lot of, in this one, if you look at some Saint Sebastians, when you're looking at them next time, there's a million different ones. In this one, you'll notice there's an arrow going into his heart, more or less, there up in the upper right-hand side as we're looking at him. But a lot of the arrows, you notice, and in a lot of paintings, the arrows don't go into a vital organ. It's quite a tradition when painting Saint Sebastian that the arrows are like in his neck, or an arm, or a leg. They're not in vital organs. And it's a symbolic message, right? What's the symbolic message, do you think? That you can't really kill a martyr. That he's going to live, that God is going to raise him beyond his martyrdom. That try as you might, his spirit is going to live. So artists will show the arrows going into him, but not in vital ways that truly kill him. To emphasize that he is going to be raised by God and not really die in a way. Saint Sebastian was an early Christian martyr, and he was from the military experience that was expecting him to pledge allegiance to one of the Caesars as God, and he wouldn't, and so that's what happened to him. Okay, let's just, this is, so I'm just going to talk about a few pieces here, and just to help us to encounter Christian art and how interesting it can be. And some of these pieces you'll know, and some of them might be new to you. One of the things that art wants to do when we're talking about the transcendent is to move beyond the ordinary, but also to bring the ordinary into the extraordinary. And a person that really grasped how to do that was an artist from the Counter-Reformation, Caravaggio. So some of you might know Caravaggio. And in this painting, we see these pilgrims who are encountering a vision of the Blessed Mother with the baby Jesus. If you were a pilgrim, the way that this, what's unique about this, besides it's just nice, it's just beautiful, is that Caravaggio is sort of the first realist. He started painting real human faces and figures, and he painted regular people having experiences. This was in the 1500s. So before the 1500s, kings and queens had experiences, or saints, or biblical figures. That's what all of the topics of painting were for 1500 years. And Caravaggio comes along and starts painting like regular people. It was extraordinarily revolutionary. It just had not been done. Why did he do this? Well, he was part of the Counter-Reformation movement, which was trying to counter the Reformation. In other words, bring people back into the Catholic faith, because the schism had started with Protestants, and so the bishops of his day, particularly Spencer might have to help me with this. I forget who the famous bishop was of that period. From Milan, was a sponsor of Caravaggio's, and he said, I like your style because it's going to appeal to our resuscitating the Catholic faith. It's going to draw people into. So notice how this painting draws pilgrims into the painting. And notice how the pilgrims are just ordinary folks. This old woman here, she's not pretty, but she's beautiful, isn't she, in her faith? Doesn't she express something? And so that's what Caravaggio was able to capture, one of the first people to capture something that isn't pretty, but something that's quite profound and transcendent. Look at this man's feet. If we could see this, one of these days we'll figure out how to do this. If we could see his feet more clearly, you can see they're dirty. Why would a painter paint dirty feet? That had never been done before, and it was weird. Well, the painter paints dirty feet because your feet and my feet are dirty, so that we can relate to these people. These are common, ordinary, maybe even poor people who are on a pilgrimage. Where are they on a pilgrimage to? They're on a pilgrimage to Rome. Rome had was being revived and reconstructed as a pilgrimage site. It was a way to kind of, again, revive the faith and get to draw pilgrims to Rome. And the famous basilicas of Rome, pilgrims had to walk around and go to get their indulgences and stuff, or whatever was going to happen to them, their spiritual experiences. So pilgrims were being called to come and have a spiritual experience in Rome. And so here's two just regular Joes having a spiritual experience in Rome, and their feet are dirty. They've walked a long time. They have a walking stick. And notice they're having a vision. This isn't just Mary kind of being there. They have a vision. So in other words, miracles, visions, an experience of the divine is accessible to everyone. You hear me preach about that a lot, and we still maybe don't get it. That just ordinary people on a pilgrimage to Rome with dirty feet can encounter a vision of the Blessed Mother. She's available to everyone. Spiritual experiences are available to everyone. This is from the 1500s. We know that they're having a spiritual experience because if we could see this close enough, we see that her feet aren't touching the ground. Notice her one foot is kind of like this. There's nothing to support the weight of her holding that big baby, Jesus, and the other foot, if we could see it better, is not quite touching the ground either. So she's floating. So it's a vision. They're having a mystical vision. So mysticism is available to you and I. Well, what a thing for a painter to express, right? For Caravaggio to grasp that, and for the church to promote that. That mysticism wasn't just for the saints or for people we designate as holy, or that an experience of Mary appearing can happen, however that happens to anyone. Of course, we have traditions of that continue then, like with Lourdes and that type of thing, etc. So you kind of get, here's a fun thing I forgot to tell you. And so when you come into the church, you come in the door from this side. So as pilgrims came in, the way the painting is positioned, as pilgrims came in, they would walk in this way. And so they would have the experience of seeing the vision of Mary just like these folks. Notice his butt is sticking out of the painting. That's a weird thing too, isn't it? And that's because it draws you in, the audience is drawn into the experience. So it's like that person sitting in front of you in the pew, if in a kneeling church. I guess even in a standing church, huh? You see their backside as part of the assembly. So you're part of the assembly here. And there's something beautiful and special about that, but also something quite ordinary. And that had never really been painted anything like that before either. It was rather shocking. Some backstories, maybe there'll be one here we can point to. So let's see another slide there, Lenny. Lenny's. This is the conversion of Paul, or when he falls off his horse. This is by Caravaggio also. And so this is a really interesting painting too, because look at, again, St. Paul, who's on the ground here, is having an ecstatic experience, an out-of-body experience. Notice how he's not painted as, his blinding is more of a vision, of a vision of ecstasy. So the position that he's in is, acceptance and surrender simultaneously. It's quite an exquisite posture. So when he falls off the horse, we don't see violence per se or anything. We see this type of sublime surrender. And this is what we're capable of too, Caravaggio is saying. This is the Christian way. Sublime surrender to the will of God, and it will feel good. It's not scary. It's something we want to embrace, and something that we reach out for, and something that we can accept, and something that we're filled with. It might bring us martyrdom, as the red vest, the red gown around him suggests, that it's a sacrifice. We're sacrificing ourselves for an encounter with Christ. So Caravaggio uses symbolic colors all the time to indicate certain things. There's certain green, which represents life, a new life, but a new life that comes through a transformation that involves the red is symbolic of blood that involves a sort of shedding of your own old self. So Saul will be shed. Saul is dead. And who's coming to life, the green by his head, who's coming to life is Paul, the apostle. And we see the very gentle person leading the horse, which represents the man in the background, is sort of the gentleness of this encounter with God. It's not a violent thing. It's not a scary thing. The person in the background who's guiding the horse is sort of an image of God guiding the experience, and that God's guiding of the experience is one of care and concern. He's not going to let you fall and break your neck. He's just there and as like your grandfather perhaps. And so anyway, that's just such a nice posture and such a beautiful expression. Here's something fun to talk about. I showed this to the daily mass people. This is an image, one of the first images of Jesus. In the early church, the first 3 or 4 centuries of church art, they portrayed Jesus as the shepherd, as the good shepherd. When we think of a good shepherd, what age do you think shepherds were? They were boys. So this is the first several centuries, early Christianity's understanding of who Jesus was. A young boy, a teenager. Of course, he died young. So I have an image in my head of Jesus as being a little older than a teenager, so it's interesting to see this. Also the connection to King David. So he's made to look like kind of a Davidic figure, like a handsome youth. So this is Jesus as the Good Shepherd, and the Good Shepherd as a handsome youth. What an interesting, it's a whole different way of approaching who Jesus was or might have been, and that the early church had this understanding. And so when they prayed to Jesus, in their mind, that's who they were praying to. You might ask yourselves then, in the mind of our fantasy, is that who we think we're praying to? And notice how happy the sheep is there on him. It has a little smile. And the boy looks pretty happy to be doing his thing. And it's just it's sweet, but it's not sweet because it's strong. The strength of carrying the sheep and the doing that well, and the energy in the movement of his legs, and it's all in stone, of course. And this is from like the early 4th century, so like 325 or something. And you can see the transition here from Greek art to Christian art, so that we would have inherited Greco-Roman styles and then translated that into our own Christian faith. I just found that kind of fascinating. Okay, Lenny, let's see another one and see what happens. This is, of course, the famous fountain in the plaza in Rome. You can't see this one too well. I wanted to show it to you because it's just pretty, but also it's powerful. And this is by Bernini, the sculptor Bernini, and this is in the Piazza Navona, and the famous statue and fountain that's in the middle of it. He worked on it for about a year or so, and it was behind a wall. No one saw him working on it. No one knew what he was doing. There was like tons of rumors in Rome. This is during the 1500s also, so this was part of the whole Roman revivalism, and the popes were trying to get people interested in coming to Rome again and experiencing things. So this was a fountain that he worked on, and he brought this obelisk, which you can't see too well in the dark, and especially on this picture, but at the very top of this is an obelisk from Egypt. It weighs like 40 tons. And it's sitting on an arch, and there's water coming out of this thing. How on earth was that? People were amazed. So this was like, what would be the thing here that's happened? So when they took the walls down and they revealed this sculpture, there'd been a lot of controversy about it. No one knew what he was doing, and blah, 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 you know how that goes. So they took the walls down, and people encountered that. Well, people flocked to Rome. It was like, I don't know what type of exhibit we've had here, but the opening of a Star Wars movie. I mean, people went to Rome specifically to have this experience of seeing this fountain because it was so magical, so transcendent. How on earth is this Egyptian obelisk being supported by an arch? And of course, that's the beauty of Roman arches, isn't it? The strength that an arch actually can have. And then the magnificent sculptures all around it. And on each corner of the sculpture represents one of the continents. Remember, the New World had just been discovered, and in fact, voyaging to India and everything. So they knew about the continents now. So this corner in particular, there's a palm tree on it. It represents Africa. I think there's a crocodile down at the bottom. So you have a continent of Africa, and you have a continent of America represented in this fountain, which is fascinating. They have like corn stalks and some sort of Native American thing. So it was kind of one of the first statues or sculptures that represented the totality of the world. So that made it quite unique too. Bernini was an amazing master. You know, there's a dispute about who was more interesting or did a better job, Bernini or Michelangelo. It's really, both. But Bernini was more prolific. He produced so much of the exquisite sculpture and fountains and art in the Vatican, in Rome during this period. So some of you may have seen this when you go to Rome. Let's all go to Rome. Don't you think that's a nice idea? We're supposed to, in this year of mercy. So Gil, would you get that together, please? And with you and Sandy work on it. We might have a little pilgrimage there, so think about it. Okay, let's see what you come up with next there. This is another wonderful Bernini sculptor. This is David, from David and Goliath. And you can see what's so wonderful about this is no one had ever seen this type of energy in a sculpture before. Look at the energy in this. If you could see his face close up, he has this kind of determination. His arm, this is all one piece of marble. His arm is pulling the thing back that he's going to throw at Goliath, the sling. So there's this kinetic energy, the angle of his body and the arm, to capture this movement in stone. How do you capture movement in stone? The Greeks are really good with, nice figures and some things. But this is the first time that a type of real movement had been captured. So look at his foot, as we're looking at it on the right, is up. So this is another issue of how on earth is this thing standing exactly? Well, there's a kind of stump that helps the process, but both of his feet are rather disengaged with the ground, and the legs aren't supporting the sculpture, and it's leaning way over. So there's just this amazing energy and magic too. What makes it transcendent is there's just the exquisite craftsmanship and beauty and topic matter, but also the mystery of how can that even be done? So you put all that stuff together and you get something that's more than just ordinary, in other words. And so here's a piece of religious art from the Old Testament that's quite inspiring and quite beyond the ordinary. And a good example of Bernini's ability to use stone as energy. Okay, next. This is the inside. Here, if we look at what also can be artistic, it's just the architecture, the interior of a space. This is the inside of the basilica at Assisi, the basilica dedicated to St. Francis. And you can just see the use of colors and arches and paintings, all along these side walls. You'd see at the bottom, here at the very bottom walls going this way, if we saw it better, are those famous Giotto paintings. And what I really liked about this is how they painted the ceiling blue. A lot of the ceilings in this time were painted blue with stars. This blue was really, really hard to find. This was really, it's like lapis lazuli, and it was a really hard color to produce. In fact, they can't produce it anymore. So when they had that earthquake some years back, and some of the ceiling was lost, and it can't be reproduced now, because they don't know how to do this color. But imagine being in that basilica, in the 1500s, or 1400s, or and it was lit with candles, and the whole ceiling was blue, and it had gold stars on it that flickered from the candlelight. The transcendent experience, that you were in a different world. You were in a world that was familiar and unfamiliar at the same time, beyond and yet present. So it took you into a transcendent experience. So architecture can do that in and of itself. So there are different forms of art: painting, music, architecture. How we build a building can express, of course, something about who we believe ourselves to be, what our theology is, and help us be formed in that. The building itself, the best type of church, is built in such a way that it helps to form the worshiping assembly. So churches aren't devotional objects in and of themselves. They're first and foremost primarily how do the people worship? How are they conducive towards helping the assembly to worship? And if that includes devotional niches like our Saint Joseph over here or our Blessed Mother over here, and that helps us to pray, that's great. But they aren't primary places just to have devotional objects. They're places so that we can worship around the altar, which is the primary symbol, the symbol of Christ in our heart, in our midst, in the center of our assembly, around which the body of Christ gathers. In case you ever wondered what the primary symbols are in the liturgy, it's the altar, the ambo from which the word of God is proclaimed, you all. And notice that, we don't particularly decorate up there, but we emphasize to help celebrate who the assembly is, that you are the ordinary green color with the banners over you. And then the presidential chair, which represents the leadership of Christ in our midst. The tabernacle is not a primary symbol of the liturgy. The tabernacle is more or less a devotional object. It's where we put the remnant of the Eucharist that we just celebrated that remains so that we can distribute it to people who couldn't be at Mass. So this is the evolution of the tabernacle. It's the place that we put that consecrated bread that remains, that hasn't been consumed, so that we can bring it, so that our deacons and all of you Eucharistic ministers can bring it to the homebound or to the sick. And during the week, we can come here and pray in front of the tabernacle, remembering the wonderful Eucharist that we had together this last Sunday, what joy it produced, etc. So it's a touch point for the encounter with Christ that the whole assembly had also. But it's primarily for the reserving of our meal to be shared with those who couldn't be there. Okay, do we have another one? Isn't he doing good? I don't know how he hears. Here's a very famous Bernini. This is the Teresa, the Ecstasy of Teresa. So we're back to ecstasy. And again, how can just ordinary people have an experience of God? And an experience of God being one that is one of similar to a sexual experience. Sexual experience is a type of God experience. At best, it's a holy experience. That's why the church is preoccupied with it sometimes, because it's the closest, one of the closest things to out-of-body experiences that we can have, that also draw us into the divine and make us proximate and close to the most creative act there is in bringing another human being to life. And God does that, and we help with that. So this is all interrelated. And so when a saint who is a virgin nun has an experience of God, what the artist is saying, and what the saint wrote about, Saint Teresa of Avila, is that it's an ecstatic experience. It's like a sexual ecstasy in a way, So we see her just like that image that we saw of Saul becoming Paul from Caravaggio. Here Bernini, in the very famous sculpture from Santa Vittorio. It's a few blocks down from the train station in Rome. Don't miss it if you go to Rome. You must go to Santa Vittorio. It's really close to the train station. And it's just there, like, that's what's wonderful in Rome, is like, this would be like over there where our statue is. Instead of having our statue there, we'd have a Bernini. You just go, oh, okay. That's nice. Of course, it's priceless. And look at the energy in the garments flowing. That use, what makes it a masterpiece of just the ability to carve in such a way, of course. To make cloth out of stone, to make cloth that really imitates, to make stone really imitate what cloth can do. That was quite an amazing thing. But just her whole openness, like the painting from Caravaggio, her just relaxedness in the encounter with God, the surrender, the overwhelmedness. She has a beautiful face about it. Her foot is dangling. You notice she's surrendered. I love this dangling foot. and her hand is kind of dangling. Now, the angel is the symbol of God, and he has a heart. He has an arrow, and he's piercing her heart. This is what she said an encounter with God felt like an arrow piercing your heart. And it's the cutest thing, because it also connects then that whole Cupid imagery from pre-Christianity and turns the pre-Christian image of Cupid into a Christian image of an angel of God being part of this experience of an encounter with God. All experiences with God are mediated. We never have direct experiences with God. It's all experiences with God come through something, and particularly comes through art, or comes through a meal, or comes through the songs that we sing together. So no one has a direct experience of God. Every experience of God has to come through something. We call that mediated. Here it's coming through an angel piercing her heart. And the cutest thing about this angel is he has this little smirk on his face. Like he's kind of enjoying it, or what? So it's cute. Is he enjoying that she's enjoying it, or does he just kind of like piercing people's hearts? And is that a bad thing, to have your heart pierced by God? Or is it a fun thing? And so it begs some questions here. That's what makes it transcendent. It gets us to think, right? Truth and beauty. Beauty is about the truth. What gets us into the truth? What is the truth about an experience with God? It should knock us out and feel kind of good. But it might break our heart a bit too. There's a legend that when they did an autopsy of St. Teresa of Avila, there was a hole in her heart, like a slit. Okay, what do we have next here? Here's a fountain. Look, a fountain can be a piece of art. This is just a fountain at the Vatican, there in the square. And it's a fountain at night. And I would walk past it, and it just captivated me. It was so baptismal. It's just gushing water, and the light from it, and the sound from it. So, and you notice there's kind of triune, so it reminds us of the Trinity, and just the abundance. Art, sometimes it's artful just to have an abundance of things. For instance, what did you notice the poinsettias this year that we used at Christmas? I think there was still some back there, maybe they're done now. And what was the difference this Christmas between having 3 huge poinsettias and having 100 little ones? There was a difference, and people felt it and commented on it. And because there was something mysterious and beyond and kind of over the top and yet wonderful about the largeness of the big poinsettias. And they captured our attention and brought us into the celebration in a new way. So it was very artful and very beautiful of Julie to have helped lead us into that. She also used kind of ordinary flowers this season, so that Christmas wasn't just something that, like Caravaggio, Christmas wasn't something that they celebrate in New England because they have the right stuff. But we can do it here with roses that are growing, or any other type of liturgical color flower that's white. And it's like when we use tropical flowers at Easter here. They represent the colors of the rainbow, and the rainbow is a symbol of hope and of resurrection. So during the Easter season, we use a variety of, and tropical flowers are also symbolic of paradise, right? Hawaii is paradise in everyone's mind, and so we bring paradise into the assembly because God has brought paradise into the assembly with the resurrection. So this is how even natural things can speak to us in an artistic placement or an artful, intentional use of them. So just lovely. The lighting is wonderful. The way it lights up. There's not light going at it. And so that's very interesting too. The light is mysterious and makes it kind of transcendent in and of itself just through the lighting. But the abundance of the water, that's why we have water here and we baptize children in an abundance of water. We don't put like a thimbleful of water on their forehead and, oh my God, they're wet. Baptism is about being immersed in the waters of life, and to experience a death and resurrection with Christ, or with the community surrounding you. And it's a fuller, richer sign and symbol when things are done not in little ways, because our God isn't little, but in bigger ways. Now, we have to be careful with that. If we pour a quart of oil on the kid, that could be problematic. So we want to put enough oil on somebody when we anoint them, but that we can see that the person's getting anointed, but we don't want to put so much oil on them that now it's you can't hold the kid. He's like a slippery eel in your hands or something. Okay, let's see what we might have next. I don't know how many of these I sent to Lenny, so here's a wonderful statue of the risen Lord by Michelangelo. I don't know if you know this Michelangelo, but it's a particularly neat one. How long am I supposed to talk? I don't want to keep you if you have to go pick up kids or something. Are we going to 7:30 or 7:15, or what were you told? 7:30? Okay, we're almost there. So I think this might be there might be just one more slide. So this is a sculpture by Michelangelo, the risen Lord. It's an interesting risen Lord, isn't it? Because here he is, he's human, he's alive, he's vibrantly alive, he's a strong male image, and he's holding his cross. He's conquered it, he's a victor over his cross. And what's really fun about this sculpture is that, again, you just walk into a church, and it's like, there it be, right there's the Michelangelo, next to in their sanctuary. It's just been there a couple centuries, and it's one of their devotional objects. This is in Rome, in the church that the Dominicans run. I'm trying to remember the name of it. Santa Minerva. Have you heard of Minerva? It's like Santa Minerva over something. So it has the famous sculpture of the elephant in front of it, but I know it's Santa Minerva, or it's over Minerva. Might be Santa Maria over Minerva. So it's a church that was built over a Roman temple. So it's over Minerva, and I think it's Santa Maria over Minerva. It's controversial right now because a century or so ago they put that loincloth on him. He's naked underneath, and he wasn't sculpted with that loincloth. And so imagine the comfortableness of people, to imagine Jesus as a real person. Michelangelo always had his crucifixes of Jesus, and his sculptures of Jesus were usually in the nude, is the word we use in art. But a century or so ago, they put that loincloth on there because of the sensitivity of some of the tourists, is what was said. Now, as a matter of fact, John Paul II, I think it was, or it might have been Francis, I think it was John Paul, who asked, with the restoration of the Sistine Chapel, who asked that all these loincloth things be removed, that they were not, that they debilitated the integrity of the art and of the artist. It was John Paul II, because it was part of his whole affirmation of human sexuality and the theology of the body. And so, but these people got special permission not to remove the loincloth, because it's a very visited thing, and they were particularly afraid of offending the Muslims, they said, that came there. But hooray for John Paul II, and so many of the loincloths off of these figures were removed. Quite a few of them were removed off of the Sistine Chapel ceiling. Some of them still remain. So, so there was some progress there, the restoration of the original intention of the artist, and the movement from our being squeamish about human sexuality to celebrating it, and celebrating it in a holy way. That being human is good, and human sexuality is good, and how do we portray that in ways that are transcendent and true, right? So what's wrong with this piece? It's not precisely truth because of the loincloth. It's hiding something that we don't need to. So this is why it's controversial. But we know that it's true in terms of Jesus as victor and Jesus as beautiful, Jesus is risen, full of life and energy and vigorous, and embracing the cross, as not as an instrument of torture, but as an instrument of life. That you thought you put me to death, and you know what? I'm friends with this cross. So that moves the Christian imagination and the encounter with God through art also. Do we have any left, Lenny? 3? Good Lord. Okay, we saw that one already. Okay, just put these guys down here, the guards there. But these costumes, uniforms, these were by Michelangelo. And, what's interesting about them is that, they're still wearing them. So there was something that Michelangelo created in the form of clothing. Clothing can be artistic too. Clothing is a celebration of the human form. When clothing is done in its best way, it's a type of celebration of being human and the human form and a certain pride one has. And play also, clothing can be play. Clothing we use in the liturgy as a type of celebrative. Vestments are celebrative and colorful and lead us into the celebration, hopefully, rather than being merely representation of certain piety or something. So I just put that up there to show how clothes can be artistic too. That it's withstood the test of time. That's something about art that is good and bad. A lot of people use that as an excuse. Well, I only like what they painted in the 18th century, or I'll only wear the clothes that the Swiss guards wear. Well, okay, it'd be a little anachronistic, but they still fascinate, and they still seem to have a certain sense about them that dignifies these people, and yet also borders on the playful. Anyway, so it's art in a way because it does several things at once. Good art can pull together things and do several things at once. Okay, next. Let our poor people go here. Food can be artistic, right? So we're talking about food. This is some foie gras. I thought it was pretty. But it's beyond pretty. There's something quite beautiful about it, I thought. It looks like a painting, like an abstract modern art piece or something. But the care, the attention to detail, this makes it not just goose liver. It kind of elevates it beyond the common, right? It's something beyond goose liver. It's well, it tastes really good too. But it's the presentation, the care, the arrangement. A lot of art is about where and how we put things. The Art and Environment Committee knows that I come in, like they'll set things up, like where the poinsettia went and stuff, and they always know that Father Scott will come in and go, no, it needs to be 3 inches over. And then they go, oh, you're right. Or maybe I just might be a little obsessive compulsive. But but sometimes I'm right. So art is about the relationship of this to that too. That's the proper relationships. So this is there's something beautiful and true about the elevation of cuisine. Cuisine like good art or like good writing is different than just like chomping down a bowl of macaroni and cheese. As lovely as macaroni and cheese can be, there's yet another level that you can take that. Okay, we might have one more. Oh, okay, I think this is our last one. This is a kid in the confessional. It's one of those old-timey confessionals. It's at a church in Rome. And he's just playing in it. He's sitting in there playing in the confessional. I just thought that was really fun, that a kid could feel that comfortable in a church. I don't know if we'd let kids play in our confessionals here, or if we even have them. But he's in there, and he's like scooting down, and then he popped up, and then I caught him popping up and took a picture of him. I just thought it was so neat the way that he was engaging. That's another good thing about some art, is that we can engage in it. If you go to the cathedral in Los Angeles, One of the beautiful things about that cathedral is in the sanctuary you can walk around, and they invite people, just walk around in the sanctuary, touch the altar, go to the bishop's chair, touch the things, and touch is such an important thing to be able to do too. A lot of art we can't because it might be in oils or something, so we wouldn't want to mess them up. But a lot of sculptures, the sculptor encourages us to touch them. The smoothness of the thing does something to us, is its own beautiful and transcendent experience. I think that was the last one, right, Lenny? Okay, great. So that was just playing with you there and giving you some insight and some examples of this and that as it relates to Christian art, architecture, cuisine, literature, sculpting, painting. So there's all these mediums, and I only presented to you mainly ones from a certain period, but that's not to rule out, and I'll close with this, that's not to rule out that the contemporary, that there's something wrong with the contemporary, or that the contemporary can't get us to experience the transcendent. If you look at some of the architects these days, like the architect who built the Disney Concert Hall, the way we can use materials now, the use of computers for constructing things, what's available to express through architecture is amazing these days. Frank Lloyd Wright said that architecture was the mother of all the arts. That architecture was the mother of all the arts. And if you think about it, it's kind of true, because the first thing that we had to create really was shelter, before unless maybe the people at Lascaux who did the cave paintings would argue that if they were living in caves and painting in the caves, then that was the first art. But in terms of creating a whole thing outside of the cave, or outside of nature, or participating with nature and God to create something, probably shelter was one of the first things. They also say that the first types of buildings that people built, even the hunter-gatherers in England and in the Middle East, the hunter-gatherers who wouldn't have had cities they lived in and stuff, they would have been nomads, came together and built buildings for religious purposes. They're discovering these days. So probably some of the first buildings built, even by non-city dwellers, were for some type of gathering religious purpose, much like Stonehenge. They still don't quite know what that was all about. Okay, we're done. Is that what that means? Do you want lights on? Yeah, let's put lights on. That'd be great. And remember that one little thing, put the lights on, that there's a movement in the church right now to interpret what we mean by beauty, truth, and goodness as a revival of styles of art and architecture that we experienced in the 50s. And I find that that's not truly beautiful then, because it's not true. We're not living in the 50s anymore. And it's not the expression of the people of God who are alive now and can encounter God and express God in our own way now. That is not to say that everything is wrong with the art of the 50s, but a lot of it in terms of church use was bordered on overly pietistic or a little schmaltzy, or stuff that would more be appropriate to a family chapel or the home or your own private use. So bringing that all back, and bringing back Gregorian chant, because that was just the only good music there could possibly be, it's quite disputable. And it's not to say that there's, Gregorian chant's lovely, but is that the song of our experience? We need to capture in our own way and in our own day a language and an expression of our own encounter with God in the materials that we have at our own disposal, in authentic ways that are about God with us now, not just the way God was with people in the past. We can honor that and appreciate that, but not make that the norm again for some pietistic reason. Okay, well, I'm supposed to have let you go like 5 or 10 minutes ago, but are there any questions?